Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Sermon Scraps. So we are finishing or working through our new mission and vision statements. So last week we talked about the new vision statement of making and maturing disciples of Jesus. We looked at Matthew 28 for that. This week we begin looking at our new vision statement, which begins by glorifying God. So we looked at a few different passages. We were kind of all over the place. We begin in Exodus 33. We quickly talked about John 17, and then we did Romans 8 for a little bit and landed in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. I'm going to give you the full statement that we'll be working our way through, though. So first is glorifying God, and we do that through gospel-centered worship, gospel-shaped community, gospel-driven mission, and it culminates in gospel-rooted growth. So those are what we'll be setting together over the next few weeks. So this coming Sunday will be gospel-centered worship. If you've been paying attention to the bumper video at the beginning of the sermon every week, it actually walks through all of those ideas. So I'm not trying to be secretive this time and slowly roll them out one at a time. That is the whole big statement. Glorifying God through gospel-centered worship, gospel-shaped community, gospel-driven mission, culminating in gospel-rooted growth. Now I have it up on my whiteboard, and it's been up there for months at this point. So just referencing that. And we, at the end of this sermon series, we'll see how they all fit together with the core values of we welcome, word, worship, and witness. And then we'll just have a framework of kind of putting all our ministries together and the language that we'll use moving forward together. So Exodus 33, what I talked about is the opposite of glorifying God is idolatry. One of the, we talked about the Westminster Shorter Catechism, what is the chief end of man? We've been doing the New City Catechism with my little kids, and one of the questions in there is what is idolatry? And so they have both adult and kid versions. At some point, we'll be doing them as a church. There's 52 of them, so one for each week of the year. I think it's worthwhile training your kids in some of these theological concepts while they're young, so they can have a theological framework as they get older. But one of the questions in there is what is idolatry? So I've taken the kids version and condensed it down even further for toddlers. And so my kids will answer, if you ask them that, trusting in things. I think that's a good summary of what we're looking at, trusting in the things that God has given us instead of trusting God himself. Now, one thing I didn't talk about yesterday, but I think is important, if you look at in Exodus 33, second half of verse 1, after God has talked, it says, depart to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. I think it's interesting to note that God always keeps his promises. I didn't really bring that up in the message yesterday, but it's worth noting that God is a covenant-making and a covenant-keeping God, unilaterally. And so even when the people are disobedient, even when they have made a false idol of a golden calf, God is still going to be faithful in providing everything that he promised he would do, even if it means that his people are being disobedient, disrespectful to what he has explicitly commanded them to do. Another thing I just breezed through that I think is worth mentioning as well is the tent of meeting. So that verses 7 through 11, it has this like sidebar about Moses' relationship with God that is unique and unlike anyone else, where Moses would talk to God face to face. Now, later on in the Old Testament, there's another tent of meeting that coincides with the tabernacle. Most scholars think this is a separate tent of meeting that was assembled before the tabernacle was built. So as the people were walking through the wilderness, God's presence came upon them as a pillar and a cloud, and so then they would follow that pillar and cloud around as they traveled, and then people think that this tent of meeting was unique just for Moses. And then it's just interesting. It's his assistant Joshua, son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So Joshua guarded and took care of this tent of meeting. You should also have asked the question, how does Moses speak face to face? If you go later on into verse, let's see here. There's a verse that talks about how you cannot see God's face and live. Verse 20, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. So then earlier in verse 11, it says, Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to a friend. So how do those two things reconcile? What this is talking about is earlier in verse 11, it's talking about the close and intimate relationship, connection that Moses and God have. So it's not that Moses sees God's glory, sees him face to face. They talk, they interact, they have a relationship that is like a close friend. And it's worth mentioning this. I didn't bring this up yesterday either, but this is a theme throughout all of Scripture. You can trace the storyline of Scripture in this idea of God dwelling with his people. So last fall we studied Genesis together. If you remember, one of the things that I brought out in that is a lot of the description and language that is used to describe Eden can be found in the tabernacle and the temple language later on in the Pentateuch. And then you find the culmination of that exact same language from Eden to the temple and tabernacle all the way up through the new heavens and the new earth. Then in the in-between time, we are called temples and tabernacles. Now what's crazy is God dwells with us. So we are supposed to be God's glory. We represent God's glory to the world today. So if you think back to what God told Moses, that no one can see my glory and live, no one can see my face and live, that's where what I talked about in John 1:14 is incredibly important. John says, now we have seen his glory. Now they saw it both in the transfiguration and in just Jesus himself, reflecting perfectly, imaging God to the world. And then we landed the plane. So Romans 8 was talking about the suffering piece, landed the plane in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. We all with unveiled face, beholding the glory, without a veil, of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. Now, this 1 degree language. It's the same goal. It's becoming more and more reflecting God's image to the world, reflecting God's glory to the world. So that is again a brief summary of some of the things that I wanted to point out from this idea of glorifying God. It was really fun seeing the kids dedicated again yesterday and being able to celebrate and participate in that with the life of the body. I hope you guys all had a wonderful Mother's Day, celebrating with your families, and we will be continuing this series next Sunday looking at gospel-centered worship. So I look forward to continuing this series then.